Joining me live now, Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Well, Tim, we just had Peter Gleeson on the show and she said, you know, when you've got a Premier at the helm for 10 years and then he wakes up on Monday morning and says, I didn't know anything about this, it's somewhat incredulous, isn't it?
Oh, let's be brutal about it. Peter, he's lying. I mean, I knew about it. The entire Labor Party, Victorian division of the Labor Party, is held together through sticky-taped, pre-signed membership forms used for branch stacking, and it's hardly a surprise to anybody. What's extraordinary and what everybody in the Labor Party is saying in this building and in the Victorian State Parliament is the extent to which it's been recorded on camera, so it's been fully exposed, and the Australian people and the Victorian population have seen the deep, dark underbelly of the Australian Labor Party.
And Tim, where does this leave Anthony Albanese? Because obviously there's a lot of structural reform that's going to go into the process. He's involved in pre-selections and making sure that branch stacking isn't part of that particular process. Where does this leave Albanese and his grip on the power within the Labor Party?
Well, when you watch the footage on 60 Minutes on Sunday night, one of the things that Adam Solirek was worried about was who was going to protect Albo, because basically he was the protector of Albo in Victoria. Anthony Albanese sits atop of the peak of the patronage pyramid that operates out of all of these structures, and so it's going to be deeply destabilising for him, for the other federal MPs from Victoria, but of course it's going to be most clearly felt in the Victorian division, the Victorian government, because so many decisions over years have been made based on who gets what benefit associated with which stacking activities that have gone on, cabinet makeups, including, of course, the individual, Adam Solirek himself, who was put back into cabinet after being earlier sacked. And so all of this is going to unwind. Basically, the Victorian federal and state MPs are now drawing clear battle lines for a fight, and no one knows where it's going to head, but it's going to be brutal, it's going to be ugly, to the point where they're probably going to be slipping over each other's blood.
All right, let's switch to another controversial part of Victorian politics right now, and that's the Belt and Road Initiative. We've heard constant criticism about how the Andrews government is putting Victorian interests ahead of the national interest. We've had a protester arrested today after protesting against the Belt and Road Initiative. Are you across that, Tim? What's happened there?
My understanding is that they've spray-painted something on Dan Andrews' electorate office. Now, that is a form of vandalism. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It isn't justified whether you do it on statues, whether you do it on public property and electorate offices, or you do it on private property. But the reality is Victorians are angry about the secret Belt and Road deal that Dan Andrews has done. And this is kind of the stink now that sits around the Victorian government. You've got obviously their own internal problems. They're then doing deals behind the backs of the Commonwealth government and security agencies with the Chinese Communist Party. And there is now a stench that sits and wafts around Spring Street in Melbourne because of Dan Andrews and the people who sit behind him.
And we've also got this Australian who's facing the death penalty, Calm Gillespie. Now, of course, his matter is probably going to be subject to appeal, but it's not exactly the best of times to be facing the death penalty in China, based on the fact that there is such a stalemate between the Australian government and the Chinese government when it comes, obviously, to trade sanctions, when it comes to inquiries into how COVID-19 originated. This will be a tough period for him and his family, and I'd imagine that unless there's some sort of breakthrough in that diplomatic relationship, well, then the death penalty will be carried out.
We should be very cautious about talking about a criminal trial in the context of political events. Of course, Australia opposes the death penalty, I oppose the death penalty, and let's be clear, there is never a good time to be facing the death penalty, no matter where you are. China has always used the death penalty in extreme ways, particularly related to drug trafficking, but of course the Australian government, rightly, is providing diplomatic and consular support to assist him, because we don't want to see, as we've done in every other case, Australians facing death penalty anywhere in the world.
Tim, before we go, I mean, the AFL has kicked off last weekend. There's been a lot of controversy attached to the kneeling situation in respect to Black Lives Matter. We've had people like Sam Newman very critical of it. We've had a number of people who have said that they will be withdrawing their membership of particular clubs because of that. Your thoughts?
Well, as a member of the Melbourne Football Club, I always stick by my team, even when we go through periods like this where sometimes political culture drifts over into sporting culture. But I just think we've got to be extremely careful about importing cultural issues or cultural causes from other countries. Not to say that there haven't been serious issues around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia in the past. There have been. And there's a need to talk about these issues and address them. But this is a sort of character that's being imported from the United States, and cultural battles that are being imported by the United States, which simply don't reflect Australia's tradition and history. And we've got to tell our own stories and our own history and address whatever wrongs they are as a country and move forward together, not import divisive cultural battles from other countries in the logic that you can simply impose them on our own traditions, because it's just being dishonest and not reflecting the truth of who we are as a country and not bringing the country together.
Well said, Tim Wilson. Thanks for joining us tonight on Sky News Across Australia.
Thank you for having me.